Chasing Stars by Played Crowd 5610. First part of Hunting the Nemesis. Summary. Scarscream runs into a human on a mission and can't seem to get rid of this pest. No matter how hard he tries, he shots him, throws him, and blows him up, yet he keeps coming back. Now the Brat has decided that harassing Scarscream is his new passion project. And maybe the Decepticon Air Commander doesn't mind it as much as he lets on. Or Danny accidentally comes across a huge alien mech trying to steal from an observatory and decides that he has nothing better to do than hunt this guy and all of his alien friends back on his warship. Danny needed a place to crash anyway. It's been almost a year since Danny graduated, and in that year a lot of things have happened. First off, Danny wasn't really in Amity Park anymore. He and his friends had to shut down the ghost portal permanently because all of the hunters and decided to move in and try to take over the area. Snaggy and he goes unlucky enough to make it through. Danny couldn't protect all of them, so while it was a hard decision to make, it needed to be done. Now, without the ghost portal open, ghosts couldn't just appear in Amity Park anymore. Danny would have no hunt to protect, and his being there just kept the hunters coming. Now this in turn increased the risk of any ghost who tried to visit or fight him getting captured. Jazz and Tucker were going off to university, and Sam decided to travel the world hosting rallies for the great cause she believes in. Danny would track her down often and come join in when he could. Val was still hunting in her spare time, less often now, but he knew he could count on her to keep things back in Amity safe. It hurt his core deeply to be away from them, but he would visit all of them whenever he could. But now, without a permanent hunt or humans for Danny to protect, he became someone who would travel, protect ghosts, and help souls find their way to the ghost zone when they had gotten trapped in the human realm. He helped out wherever he could and made sure no one would get grabbed by any ghost hunters under his watch. Where Danny Phantom was needed, he would be there in a heartbeat. And that's precisely what led him to be flying over some portion of Florida right now. There was a post that Tucker found online and forwarded to him about some kids who had broken into a random house and had a ghost encounter. Danny was already in the area, so he had no choice but to check it out. Indeed, there was an echo soul there, just barely hanging on with her form. Then he took her cursed object, brought her through a portal, and sent her safely home before the hunters followed up on the same lead he got. A good straightforward job that he had become accustomed to at this point. Suddenly, while flying, he felt a sharp shiver go down his spine. Something was strange. He could feel an unknown energy buzzing around him, and it was getting closer and closer. By the moment, he stopped mid-flight, and just as he took a second to figure out what this feeling was, he was getting assaulted by the sound of metal ripping through the air. His eyes widened for a split second, and he barely managed to duck down before getting his head chopped off by an F-16 that had already speed past him in the time it took to glance back. He was about to channel his inner grandparent, or maybe Sam, and shake his fist, angrily yelling, "I'm flying here!" But he stopped himself, staring at the direction the jet went. It left behind that strange energy, something eerily similar to that new sense he had just got. He shrugged. Why not check it out? Danny had gotten a lot faster since he was 14. Now, he figured, he could very easily keep up with the jet's pace. Maybe even catch up, but he didn't want to bring too much attention to himself. He was still technically one of Americans' most wanted in the ghost hunting brackets and the government. From the amount of DIY ghost experimentation labs he took down with Sam and Tucker in the early days, he raced after the jet, remaining invisible for the time being. The jet started to slow when it came to what looked like an abandoned observatory, sitting on the top of a hill. Danny matched its pace and waited to get a closer look while the jet landed. Instead of just descending into a typical landing like Danny expected, the jet erupted into a bunch of twists and turns until it became a 30-something foot tall robot. He fell a considerable way to the ground and landed somewhat gracefully on his stiletto-like feet. Danny grimaced. He couldn't imagine having heels permanently attached to his feet. The robot walked towards the observatory with steps that shook the ground and lifted his hands to try and pry the doors of the particularly open dome apart with long, razor-like fingers. The bot seemed to be up to no good if he was ripping into and destroying a frankly beautiful observatory, in Danny's opinion. Even if it's abandoned, he's trying to steal something, or at least looking for something. Danny landed, still invisible, on the roof next to where the bot was trying to pry the dome open, faded into visible spectrum, and shouted up to the bot, "Hey, what you doing there?" The bot startled, yanking his hands away from the observatory like he had just been caught stealing from the cookie jar, resulting in one of the large panels falling into the inside of the building with a crash. The bot seemed to wince, and his wings flicked down behind him. Danny winced as well, but continued looking at the mostly grey and red highlighted bot. The bot gave Danny a once-over before rolling his bright red eyes and continuing working on whatever it was he was doing. "This doesn't concern you, fleshling." The robot barely cast him a glance as he spoke in a tone of utter superiority, with just a sparkling of malice. Danny's ears picked back affronted. "Leave, before I make you a smear of human juice on the wall." The bot dismissively waved his hand, which was particularly as big as Danny. Danny stepped closer to the bot, crossing his arms. "Well, I think this does concern me, because it looks like you are trying to steal something. What is it?" The bot paused again. Are you the owner of this facility?" He raised what looked like a pointed metal eyebrow, while also looking more and more irritated. Danny glanced around sheepishly. "No, but I want to know what you're doing." The bot made a scoffing noise, muttering something along the lines of, They are such pests. I don't understand why the Autobots keep them." He then used the back of his hand to push Danny off the roof, like he would have been dusting crumbs off a counter. Danny's eyes widened as he fell, only barely managing to stop himself and hovering just before impact. He would have hit the ground and likely died, or broken many bones, if he couldn't fly, and the bot certainly didn't know that. He flew around and appeared on the other side. "What are you looking for?" The bot did the double take, looking in Danny's direction, and then back to where he would have been, a human-sized puddle of blood on the ground next to him. "Didn't I just—" the bot questioned under his breath, and moved to repeat the action. Then he stepped backwards to avoid the large hand. Just what? Try to kill me? Trust me, it takes a lot more than being pushed off a roof to keep me down. The bot stopped and stared at Danny. Well, annoying little earthling, you are now getting in the way of my mission, which I should add, I do intend to finish. Now leave me to it. This is not your telescope lens, and it is not your observatory, nor is it any of your business what I intend to do with it. Interrupt me again, and I'm blasting you into little fleshy pieces. He looked at Danny with pointed scorn, then reached up to continue trying to pry open the observatory doors, entirely ignoring the meddling little human. Danny could work with this. He already divulged some information out of annoyance, so maybe if Danny keeps annoying him, he will tell him more. Why do you need a telescope lens? Is it to enhance the laser of some weapon, or is it to make your own telescope? Do the people who built you want it? If so, why? The bot turned back to look at the human, affronted grandiosity flashing behind his eyes. I was not built, especially not by you little dirty planet apes. He held his claws out threateningly like talons. I'm Commander Scarscream, second in command of the Decepticon army and Air Force commander. I am not some lonely human-made machine, he sneered, showing off fangs, wings pinching back. Oh, so this guy must be an alien. So cool. Keep you gushing till later, Fenton. Alright then, Commander Scarscream. If you're second in command of an entire army, why are you down here trying to get a telescope lens by yourself? Scarscream scoffed before looking like he was backpedaling and trying to sputter an excuse. I need not explain to you my motives, human. I have the power to end your short, pitiful life right now. Again, the claws got closer, and Danny winced at the sound of the metal graining against each other as the fingers flexed. One finger threatened to slash him across his chest. Danny just stared up at him with a bored expression, and Scarscream seemed to be puzzled, then upset at the fact that the human wasn't running away or pleading for their life like he expected Danny to. Then he decided to step closer to the claw so that it was touching his shirt. I just want to know what you're using it for. Maybe if it's a good reason, I will let you take it. Maybe even help you. Scarscream's eyes narrowed. How dare you think I need your help, or that your fleshy little arms could stop me, for I am a second... Yeah, you said that already. Then he waved him off. He could almost see the fire light up in Scarscream's eyes. He wiped his hand down and rubbed his fingers around Danny's torso, lifting him up to his eyes' height. Danny was approximately the size of a Barbie doll to this guy. You little brat have caused enough annoyance for one day. I despise even touching you. Then why did you pick me up? Seems kind of counterprod. Ugh! Then he was cut off mid-sentence as the bot threw him with all his might. Then he had no idea how far he was thrown before he decided to turn invisible and start flying back. Scarscream had already gone back to fiddling with the telescope. Then he sighed and faced into the observatory, and then through the telescope. He found one lens, which was very compact, and seemed to be what the bot was looking for. He grabbed it. He showed up, this time standing on the bot's shoulder, and holding the lens. This is what you're looking for? He could barely keep a smile out of his tone. Scarscream snarled, and then eyed the piece in Danny's hands, before his eyes widened. "You little—" The bot made to reach for Danny, but he jumped off and landed on the ground, looking up at him, twisting the lens in the light. "Give it here, human!" Scarscream held his hand out, waiting for Danny to just pass it over. Danny pretended like he would pass it to him, but instead pulled his hand back with a thoughtful expression. "Not so fast." The bot flashed his fangs again. "What is it for? I want to know." Danny pressed. "You can't keep things away from me. I will just go to the next telescope." He crossed his arms, drawing Danny's attention to the 2 red missiles attached to his forearms. "The next observatory probably won't be abandoned, and then you have a whole bigger problem on your hands if you want to stay secret. You can't tell me what to do." "Then it's simple," Danny stated. "What is it for? If it's a good reason, I will give it to you." "I collect lenses. I have a whole collection." The bot gestured theatrically. "And I like to use them to observe smaller things." His voice rose hesitantly at the end. Then he raised an eyebrow. "Man, that was one of the worst lies I've ever heard." "Oh, why do you care about my lying skills? I am a brilliant tactician. You dumb creature are pathetic and can't comprehend the complex plans of a Cybertronian." Scarscream peered and smiled at his insult. Then he rolled his eyes. "Well then, if I'm such a dumb creature, I may accidentally drop this and break it. You know what a klutz we can be." Scarscream hissed. "You wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I?" He held it between 2 of his fingers, barely gripping the edge. "You break it and I will just go to the next telescope and decriminate all of the humans there. Are you willing to sacrifice that many of your kind for a lens?" He then put his hands on his hips, looking all smug. Then he rolled his eyes at the threat, though inwardly he was getting a little nervous at the possibility of this guy who had already tried to kill him, trying to kill others. "Why do you need it?" He doubled down. The bot narrowed his bright red eyes. "I'm building something." "What is it?" "This is confidential Decepticon information, and I can break this lens." The con paused. "I'm building a device that can focus a beam of energy through the lens to enhance its power, which can result in a laser of some sort, to put it lamely." Danny's foot tapped slightly. "Why do you need a laser?" Danny believed him mostly. "I answered your idiotic question, Earthling, and you dare ask me another without giving me what I want?" Scarscream's voice got higher into a screeching rage. Maybe that's why they call him Starscream. Danny thought to himself. "Last thing, I promise." Danny nodded his head. Scarscream looked ready to slash his claws through Danny and leave him in ribbons. He probably would have if Danny wasn't holding something precious. "A melting ice to get to an Energon deposit. It is our blood and our fuel, and we require it for the Decepticon's cause." Danny paused, narrowing his eyes. He then dropped the little lens into the bot's open hand. "See? That wasn't so bad." As soon as the lens was in Starscream's hand, he leaned back and aimed a missile at Danny. While it was clearly charming, he lanced the word with as much venom as he possibly could. "Speaking to you, Earth creature, I must be on my way, and you now possess confidential Decepticon information. So I bid you adieu." Danny responded with a 2-finger salute. "See you on the other side, Screamy." I will keep an eye on you to see if you hold the truth, he smirked. Scarscream snarled and fired his missile before transforming back into an F-16 and flying away from the explosion. Then he walked away from the fiery mass and dusted himself off, while looking up at the sky to watch what direction the bud went. Well, then he would certainly have to meet the sky again. Starscream thought he was rid of the human when he first dropped him off a roof. When he threw him as far as he could, which according to past experiences should have at least broken the majority of the bones the human possesses. And then he blew him up with a missile after manipulating the creature into giving up his lens, which he stole from Scarscream in the first place. But over the last several months, the human kept showing up. Scarscream had no idea how this kept happening. He normally had incredible senses, but all of a sudden the human would appear next to him. It was like this human was a scraplet in disguise and would continuously return to bite at Scarscream's outer plating and assault his audios with his increasing squawking. How this human processed the ability to locate Scarscream time and time again was a loss to him. The human was capable to appear out of thin air and follow him halfway across the planet as many times as Scarscream would check his memory blanks and the Decepticon files. He could not find any sign of humans possessing the ability or technology to teleport. He also scanned his entire frame and subspace of a tracking device. He didn't find anything. It was infuriating and, most importantly, confusing. He had to get answers to this bizarre situation, or he would lose his sanity. 3 months ago. Hey, Screamy, what's been up? Scarscream startled and slammed his helmet on the solid metal beam before him. A warning popped up in his HUD to helpfully inform him of the impact. Ouch, sorry, that looked like it hurt. The mech turned around to see the human standing on a piece of this abandoned structure, looking unbothered about the instability of the being beneath him. With one quick glance, Scarscream immediately recognized the human. He was hard to misplace, seeing as he was the only youngish-looking human with white hair he had ever come across. That and the glowing green optics he possessed. But most importantly, didn't I blast you into fleshy pieces a decacycle ago? The Decepticon stared at the human in disbelief. The human ambled around slowly with his servos in his jacket pockets. I mean, you certainly tried your best, but like I said before, many people have tried, and only one, or maybe 2, succeeded. I will have to double-check my head count there. Why are you here? Scarscream held up his talons to threaten the Earth-child, or adult, he wasn't sure. But it was a threat. This little creature had tracked him down, even though Scarscream was in a completely different place on this planet than before. This was a problem that he intended to solve immediately. The human sat down on the rusted beam, leisurely swinging his legs. He was sitting at almost shoulder height of Scarscream's frame. I was in the area, and then I felt you were near. Came to check in. How did your definitely not evil laser go? He lifted his little flash servos and bent his 2 digits repeatedly around the word definitely not evil, which Scarscream was puzzled by. Scarscream's optics narrowed, and he leaned in slightly closer to the human, so now he was right at helmet height. How did you feel I was here? I don't know, man. The human waved his service dismissively and rocked backwards on his beam. I can just sense it, like how I sensed you at the observatory before. Maybe we're connected, he gestured between the two of them. Scarscream sneered. I certainly hope not. I wouldn't want to be connected to a little squishable human like you. Aw, you think I'm squishable? The human made a strange expression Scarscream couldn't comprehend. Scarscream's processor must be malfunctioning. Since when has squishing someone been a good thing? Maybe this human was very strange and likely to be squished. This was confusing. Scarscream shook his helmet and stood up as straight as he could, wings standing at attention. If you ever want to see the light of your solar star again, human, you must leave me alone permanently. He made a show of poking the human in the chest with a single digit. And if I ever lay my optics on you again, I will. He was going to say squish, but given the human's previous reaction, maybe not. Rip you in half, the con finished off, proud of his threat. The human crossed his legs and smiled. Killing me didn't work out so well last time, did it? I will just keep showing up. I like hunting people, especially if it means I can mess with them. He laughed. Scarscream felt a vague threat from the sound that made him uneasy. I will find a way to end you if you keep following me. Scarscream flashed his fangs. The human abruptly stood. You're welcome to try, but I just discovered that annoying you will be my new favorite pastime. He bowed and then glanced up at Starscream with a look in his glowing green eyes that the Cybertronian couldn't place. Until next time, Screamy. Suddenly, the human just disappeared as if he wasn't ever there. Scarscream had to recalibrate his optics 3 times to make sure he wasn't seeing anything. Humans can't just disappear, can they? And return the human did. So been up to anything lately? World domination, dance classes. Also, I just remembered I never introduced myself. How rude of me. My name's Danny. He held out his service as if to shake Scarscream's. Scarscream blatantly ignored the gesture. I do not care of your designation. Just that you leave me to my own devices. He continued, trying to outpace the human and not continue this conversation. It didn't work. How's that malfunctioning stabilizer you were complaining about so much last time? The human appeared on a rock ledge near where Starscream was searching for a piece of tech through some wreckage. My stabilizer is functioning as it should, not that it matters to you in any way. I had Knockout run a diagnostic and fix the malfunctioned adapter, though he spent more time complaining about his horrid paint job than doing his actual job. I mean, looks are important, and if it's literally painted on your skin, I want mine to be perfect too. The human rolled over, upside down. You two must be spark mates, Scarscream groaned. Go on, bother him then, and start fueling his ego. He waved the human off. At least you will start leaving me alone then. The human gasped. Starscream glanced up, only to see that there was nothing wrong, and the human was making a strange face. He was sarcastic. Here we go, finally getting some banter going. Because of that, the con refused to vocalize the rest of the afternoon or show a single response to any of the humans' ramblings. I can crush you with one service until you are nothing but a bloody pulp. Leave me alone, Scarscream snarled after snatching up the human off the ground. Service? That's your hand, right? He pulled an arm out of the Decepticon's grip to point at his own hand, blatantly ignoring the fact that he was in danger. Something the species did as a whole, it seems. The Khan seemed to be put off by the spontaneity of the question. Naturally. What other words do you use? I'm curious. What are your eyes? He pointed towards his own glowing green ones. Scarscream paused. Optics, he hesitantly answered. Then he moved his fingers to his eyebrow. And this? This is idiotic and inconsequential. A child's game. I'm not going over Cybertronian autonomy with you like you're a whining sparkling. I have a scientific degree from Cybertron. I'm not spending it teaching some pest what an optic ridge is. Ah, optic ridge. Danny nodded. Okay, what about... Starscream vented in exasperation. No, I'm just saying, if a cow were to drink milk, would that be weird? Would it be less weird if it was a human's milk? People really need to start asking these questions. You're insufferable, and I do not want to keep hearing about milk, human, cow, or otherwise. I'm helping you get cultured. I don't need to get cultured. How about I decimate the cow and the human? Then there's no milk for your conundrum, and you have nothing to worry your small little head over. Small and little mean the same thing, Scarscreamy. I know that. And we're not decimating anything. Scarscream makes a groaning sound from his vocalizer and is about ready to pull his optics out. How was your trip to the med bay? It was a minor scrap, a mesh wound. Scarscream gestured towards the side where there was originally a gash that he had gotten from a jagged piece of metal sticking out off the side of an old lumber mill. And what did the dogbot you find so annoying say about it? You were leaking a lot of Energon, Danny asked, concerned. It was fixed quickly, and I'm back to my average working order. Average working order makes it seem like you are not the epitome of health. Then he crossed his arms over his chest. I would know, because I put off stuff about my health all the time. He paused. But what else is hurting? And what is normally wrong? Scarscream paused, looking unsure before straightening up. I am not answering your questions. Oh, come on, please! The human attempted to open his optics wider, as if it would help the situation. I promise I will leave you alone for 3 whole days if you tell me what's wrong with you. I am not divulging my private medical records with a human, he snarled. Please, the human whined in response. Scarscream picked up the human and chucked him about 20 meters, only for him to show up behind him again. Scarscream vented in exasperation and continued walking, disconnecting his audio receptors. Your wings, they move when you have different emotions. That's so cool. They are like my ears. I like that you can tell how someone's feeling just by the way they move. Is it the same for all Cybertronians? Danny had his servers up and was shaking them around like an excited youngling. Starscream took a glance back at his own wings, not thinking their unconscious movement would be interesting to the human in the slightest. It is not for all Cybertronians, primarily seekers. They normally rely on their wings as a secondary form of communication. It helps seekers connect on a deeper level and understand one another without speaking. It connects us in a way we cannot connect with a grounder frame. Starscream explained. Then he gasped, his eyes perking up, something that Starscream did start picking up on more once he noticed them. They were longer than most humans and he had come across, but not out of the ordinary. He did react similarly to the way Seeker's wings moved. The human child spoke up. So you are better at talking with the other Decepticon Seekers then? Do you hang out with them more because they understand you? Starscream froze, and Danny's expression immediately changed at the reaction to the question. Danny was about to speak up when Starscream decided to answer. I don't have access to any Seekers on the Nemesis. Not that I care for communication with others. Anyway, if there were any. Of course, he continued. There are other flyers, such as Megatron and Soundwave, as well as some of the drones, but they are all grounder frames that took a flight form because it suited their needs more. They don't understand complexities of the unspoken communication between Seekers. Danny looked up at him. Where are the others then? He asked hesitantly. Starscream couldn't blame the human. He had no idea what was going on. And Starscream had yet to talk about the consequences of war back on Cybertron to the human. Starscream didn't think the human would be interested. If this box were not extinguished during the war, most would have been taken out early on during the genocide in wars. The city of Seekers where I was from. Any remaining survivors tend to join the Decepticons or have been scattered among the stars. He lifted his service to gesture across the sky. The human looked up at the sky as well with a light expression that Starscream could not place. The wars decimated our planet and Primus within, the life-giver, so there will be no more Cybertronians, other than the ones that already exist. He clenched his service and forced himself to continue walking, mind flickering back to the long past memories of Skywarp, Thundercracker, and Skyfire. Starscream looked over at the strange weight being placed on him. The human head appeared on his shoulder, and when Scarscream didn't move to knock him off, like he normally would have at one of these attempts, he leaned up against the mech. "I'm sorry," was all he said. "Me as well, child." As months went on, Starscream was reluctantly starting to enjoy the company of the human, Danny. He began noticing that fact creeping in on him one day when he repeatedly caught himself while out scouting, glancing around to see if the human had followed him, and would randomly appear to set up a conversation. The human even tried to study his wing movements and reacted to them himself, and he was getting remarkably good at it. Starscream shouldn't be feeling happy about this. He should not find this endearing, that someone should take time out of their lives to learn something, to simply understand him better. Especially not a human, though Starscream wasn't entirely sure what Danny was anymore. He had seen the human appear out of nowhere and disappear at the same time. The human sometimes glows when he's upset or laughs too loud, and energy flows around him in waves. Starscream has scanned him every time they met since the abandoned warehouse and placed it in a folder into his memory bank. The human's vitals don't seem average. His heartbeat was barely existent, yet Danny seemed fine. Body temperature freezing, and strangely enough, the human carried an electromagnetic field very similar to that of a Cybertronian. And if the human felt a strong emotion or Starscream focused, he could sense the human's emotion as well. He wondered if Danny could feel his. Starscream was known for keeping his EM field tight to his frame, and it was almost impossible to sense his emotion without physically touching him, or Starscream allowing it, and neither of those things would be happening anytime soon. An EM field was a weakness, and he could not show to anyone. Mechs like the Autobots let their EM fields run free, and it was almost nauseating being around them and all of their free emotions. But Scarscream, if he showed every moment where he was annoyed or upset at Megatron, he wouldn't be able to make it through the bridge without being beaten. He can't show his fear when he is in an enclosed space, or the rush of anxiety he feels when he is around a much larger mech. Those are signs of weakness, and if he learned anything from being a commander, is that he can't let anyone see what he really feels. So he will continue to do so. Starscream landed just outside an abandoned Energon mine. He had been tasked with going in and making sure there was no Energon left behind for the bots to find, as there were dozens of these mines all across the planet. Once that the Decepticons have mined dry and moved on, half the time leaving behind old equipment, because it would be more hassle to move them than leave them. Wazza! Screamer? Starscream startled slightly, but at this point he was used to Danny appearing out of nowhere. He glanced over to see the human standing on the ledge of a rock face outside the cave entrance. Human, Starscream responded with a slight nod, then held out his service for the human to step onto, either to let Danny down to the ground or hold him, something that Starscream started doing in their most recent meetings. Danny smiled brightly and stepped onto the open service, carefully holding his balance as Starscream pulled the service back to himself and started into the mine. Danny sat down cross-legged in the mech's palm to better keep himself upright. "What are we doing today?" he asked cheerfully, searching for any leftover Energon after this mine dried out to make sure that it receives no unwanted Autobot attention. "If I locate any of use, we will mine it, but if it is an inconsequential amount, we will destroy the mine." "Sounds like a fun way to spend the next 5 hours." Danny leaned back, his shoulders and his head leaning against Starscream's chestplate. The mech thought about moving the human away again, so he wasn't resting so close to his spark, but decided that Danny would be more comfortable if he rested his head on something. So instead he opted for continuing down the path and trying to ignore how close the cavern walls were to him. They felt as if they were getting closer and closer to his frame, threatening to crush him. Starscream spared a glance back downward, the way they came in. The small amount of light emitting from it seemed daunting as it grew further and further away. His wing pinched back unhappily as he focused in front of him again. The human looked up at Starscream with another one of those expressions Starscream didn't understand. He then shuffled around slightly before speaking up in a strangely cheery tone compared to his contemplating expression before. "So how's good old Paint Shop and his husband doing? What do you care about Cybertronian gossip?" Starscream raised an optic range at the human. This stuff was not interesting, nor did Starscream care about any of his subordinates' personal time. "Because your life is like my very own personal soap opera." Danny smiled brightly. "Soap opera?" Starscream was confused. The human paused for a second, thinking for an answer. "Like entertainment that I can just enjoy without being involved." "That makes no sense. Why would it be called a soap opera? From my understanding, soap is something you humans clean with, and operas are presentations revolving around humans' abnormally loud vocal cords." Starscream slowly narrowed his optics, trying to understand, his mind slowly drifting away from the cavern walls. Then he paused. "I don't really know why they call it that either. Now that I think about it, either way, it's a human saying, meaning your life is more interesting than mine, so I enjoy hearing you talk about it. I do not see how my life is interesting. I don't know, man. You're a giant alien mech from outer space who is in a war and having to deal with a lot of other aliens who all seem to have superiority complexes and are simultaneously trying to work together. He laughed. Pretty interesting to me, Starscream hummed in acknowledgement, before slowly lifting Danny up to place him on his shoulder, so he can pull out his datapad from his subspace to start scanning for Energon signals. He started to tap the screen in a repetitive motion, as it began showing small error symbols, getting more and more fidgety the further they went into the mine. Danny looked over as Scarscream continued, staring at the large tablet that was almost the size of Danny himself. Starscream was nervous, very nervous. Danny wasn't 100% sure why the Seeker was so angsty right now, but judging from the looks he sent to the wall of the cave every couple seconds, Danny assumed that this big, scary 31-foot-tall murder robot was also claustrophobic. Danny got it. Small places are not the best, but was slowly able to get over his fear of being crammed in lockers as a kid after he gained the ability to phase through matter. Now, if he was in a small space, he knew he could just leave. But Starscream? He was a Seeker. He needed to be able to fly, and then he could imagine that being trapped on the ground was the exact opposite of that. And especially with the fact that there was no room for a screamer to stretch his wings in here, let alone transform to escape. Then he tried to talk to him to distract him, at least get him engaged in some conversation, and it worked for a few minutes before the Seeker went and tried to focus on his mission. Then he had been growing on Starscream. He was sure of it. He had seen the signs, even though in the beginning the mech would always try and shrug him off, or shoot him, or throw him the length of 2 baseball fields end to end. Now he had finally just given up, and even let Danny sit on his shoulder sometimes. Win! Danny didn't understand at first why he was so comfortable with him, the murderer alien who would definitely kill him, or any other human, if he had the chance, but he realized soon after hunting the bot for a month or two, Starscream is like a ghost, or at least very similar to the ones Danny has hung out with. Most of them are absolute softies on the inside, but threaten to murder him every day on the outside. It's just how they are, and Danny could tell that neither they nor Starscream really hate him. They just put up this facade. He could better with someone, and they would threaten to murder him in horrifying ways, and then he could bounce back, because he is either sure they didn't mean it, or he knows it won't affect him. And Starscream was just like that. Most importantly, Danny can sense that Starscream needs someone with him. He was not sure quite why yet, but he felt his lock-up longing feeling around him, a desperation to prevent himself from expressing any fear, any weakness, any emotion. Then he knew how that felt, and he wanted to help be there for Starscream. Who knows, maybe even get the con to like him. But his plan had been working. He had been showing up and running into the con at least 14 times in the last 4 or so months, and every time he made a point to annoy him and get the mech to talk to him. Also, Danny definitely noticed how Starscream felt uneasy when Danny was leaning against his chest, but didn't move him so he wouldn't fall. Suddenly, Starscream lifted the scanner and started shaking it violently. "Stupid piece of crap, doesn't work." He threw it against the wall with a resounding crack. "Hey, don't you need that?" Then he glanced over at the tech with a freshly shattered screen. Starscream growled. "It's not working. No use keeping it around." His claws tensing and untensing over and over as he stared at the tech. Then he crossed his arms. "Yeah, but you could have kept it and given it back to Knockout or Soundwave to try and fix, not just smash it against a wall." Starscream was too angsty. He would have thought of that first in a normal state of mind. He felt the mech vent underneath him, seemingly coming to the same conclusion Danny did. "You are correct." He leaned down, causing Danny to shift his weight to not fall off his perch as the Seeker picked up the tech. Then he heard the shifting of metal as Starscream opened up the subspace in his chest and placed the tablet inside. "Now, how do we locate Energon?" he muttered on his breath. "Should have thought of that first. Bullets for brains." Then he reached over and knocked his chuckles against Starscream's helmet, resulting in a disgruntled sound from the mech. "But I may have an idea." Starscream turned his helmet towards him, almost expectantly. "I think I can sense Energon." "How?" "That doesn't seem possible." Then he shrugged. "Well, I was able to sense you, wasn't I? I think the strange energy buzz I feel when I'm around you is Energon." "What makes you say that?" "It could be anything. It could be my EM field reflecting off of yours." Then he nodded. "It could be, but right now I feel some of it around us as well. I have a strange connection to energy, and the lifeblood of Cybertronians seems like energy to me." Then he pushed off of Starscream's shoulder, and the con scrambled to try and catch him, missing abysmally. Then he landed and rolled onto the ground safely before walking forward, fully aware of the mini spark attack he had just given his friend. "Let me try!" He ran about 30 feet ahead of Starscream down the cave system and waited, closing his eyes and breathing deeply. He was sure he could sense it. He just had to be far enough away from Starscream to do it. He started slowly ambling around with his eyes closed, just following his senses. Fully aware he probably looked crazy, walking around with his arms out like a zombie, trying to sense the strange rog. Then Danny felt it, the strange energy. It was slightly different than the Energon flowing through Starscream's frame. This one felt less alive, like it was stagnant, dry, less fresh, but it was still there. "I got it!" Starscream raised an optic wrench at him. "You can't be serious." He took a few steps closer as Danny started leading the way down the cave system. It did start to get more and more compact in the direction Danny went, and Starscream's steps started to become more cautious. Then he noticed how the tops of Starscream's wings started to scrape along the roof. He winced at the sound as the Decepticon started crouching lower, servers ringing together and twitching as if he was itching to escape this wretched place. "Almost there," Danny reassured. Then he eventually made it to a single cave wall. Some was behind here. He was sure of it. He placed a hand against the rock. "Right here." He stepped back and waited for Starscream to do whatever he planned on doing. "You better be alright, human." Starscream then held up his talon-like finger and stretched and started slashing at the rock, surprisingly taking huge chunks out and revealing more and more rock. Then he felt the ground around him shake, but he assumed it was from the rocks that were falling from the hole the mech was currently digging. Another slash and another. Danny's ears were wincing at the sound of metal on rock over and over. Starscream either didn't mind the sound or didn't care. Suddenly, there was a different sound to the slash, nothing as sharp as the nails on the rock. It sounded softer. In a way, Starscream paused and pulled back his service, glancing at the blue mark across his nails. Then back up at the hole in the wall. He reached up, then dug his claws in around the blue substance and pulled it hard. So hard that it came flying right out of the wall, almost knocking the con over as he stumbled back. It was a large chunk of blue crystal, which Danny could only assume was Energon. He had no idea how much Starscream needed for it to be a substantial amount, but he would assume they would keep digging to find more. Starscream held it in his service, surveying it closely, the crystal reflecting the light off of Starscream's optics. Suddenly the ground around them started to shake more. Then he saw rubble and dust start to fall from the cave ceiling, and a feeling of dread seemed to wash over both him and Starscream at the same moment. This mine was very unstable and collapsing soon. Scrap! Starscream opened up his subspace in his chest and tossed the crystal haphazardly in, before bending down and snatching Danny off the ground, running down the cave system as fast as he could. The clinking of his heels on the ground echoed throughout the tunnels, and for a moment it was all Danny could hear before the sound of falling rocks started from behind them, where they had removed the Energon piece. Bigger and bigger boulders crashed down behind them. Then he saw Starscream's frame instinctively try and engage in a transformation sequence to escape, but he must have immediately aborted it as his outer plating scrapped back together. They made it to a larger part of the cave system, and Starscream scrambled to a halt as a larger boulder crashed down right in front of them, almost crashing them, but also sealing off the clearest exit. "Scrap, scrap, scrap!" Starscream muttered, and Danny shared the sentiment. He stumbled back a couple of steps, and the ground shook more. Then he looked up, just in time to see a mountain of boulders falling on top of them. He tried to throw up a shield around them, but it was too late. Everything went dark. Danny opened his eyes. They were dry and stung, and all he could sense was the dust around him. In his mouth, nose, lungs, everything. The air felt incredibly thick around him. He coughed and tried to sit up, only to feel one of his legs trapped under something. Not that it would trap him for long, though. He waited for his eyes to dry and adjust, but the breeze in the air was more taxing to see through than the dark. Suddenly, he heard the groaning of metal creaking, and pain. A red light flickered on and off above him before becoming steady, and then he looked straight up to see Starscream's optics looking down at him. Then they started frantically moving around. "Looks like we got ourselves into a real mess here, didn't we, Screamer?" Then he tried to laugh, but the con's expression above him was the furthest thing from amused. He looked like he was bordering on a panic attack. Then he felt as Starscream started trying to pull at his limbs, presumably to get them unstuck, but more rubble and dust started to fall as he did so. "Starscream, wait! Moving is making it worse," he coughed, waving his hand in front of his face. "What do you expect me to do?" he screeched, but stopped pulling. "Just stay still." He held a hand out in front of him, trying to placate the claustrophobic mech. "Can you send a distress signal to your friends?" Starscream vented out a deep breath and looked to Danny. "Yes, it has been sent, but I have no real way of telling if it made it through or not." Starscream groaned again in pain. Then he bit his lip, wanting to see what was going on. He slowly started to bring up his natural brightness, lighting up the area they were trapped in, ignoring the strange look the Seeker gave him, as Danny started to become a living nightlight. Then he glanced around. Then he was in a small pocket, about 10 feet around, Above him was Starscream's head and most of his torso. Then he could see one of his servers next to him, presumably the one he was holding Danny in moments ago. He moved his hand down to the side and felt something slink and warm. His core dropped as he looked down next to him. Energon. You're leaking Energon! Danny looked back up at Starscream, pained expression. I'm aware, he gasped, again in pain, and took a few calming winds. Then he followed Starscream's line of sight to see that his wings was trapped and badly bent under a rather large boulder, likely impaling right through the outer frame. Energon was trickling down and landing next to Danny, straining the rock. Then he needed to get them out of here. Then he could instantly escape with his intangibility, but Scarscream would be left behind. But then he had used his intangibility on other people and items. He had never tried it on a being this big before, and he wouldn't want to end up leaving some part behind. If Danny had just grabbed the Mac's arm, his tangibility wouldn't have reached far enough. There was also the distress signal, but who knows if they got through. Even the Energon tracker wasn't working down here, and the signal wasn't connecting. And would Starscream's friend even make it in time before he bleeds out? Then he could feel the air around Starscream increase with panic and fear. Something similar to what he would feel around a ghost. Ghosts share their emotions in waves around them and use it to either help or show how pissed off they are, or to help smooth others. Maybe Cybertronians had something similar. Good a time as any to try it. More and more waves of fear started walking over Danny, all coming from Starscream's spark. Hey, it's okay. We will get out of here. Then he tried to push out as many calming and reassuring waves of energy as possible, trying to push back his own fears of Starscream being hurt. How are we getting out of here, human? No one is coming, and we are trapped under a mountain of rubble, crushing me. And you will soon run out of human necessities and die from starvation or oxygen deprivation down here beneath my disabled frame. His voice box made a horrid, strangled sound of panic. Seekers aren't meant to die on the ground. His voice was quiet. Hey, you're not going to die. Starscream didn't look at him. They need to try. It was their only hope. Starscream, I need you to trust me. There was more groaning of crushing metal around him, and another sound of pain. What else is there to lose? The Seeker bit out. I can get us out of here. I have an idea. Danny tried. How can you get us out of here? Between gasps, red eyes now locked onto Danny. Please trust me. I need to get as close to your spark as possible. No. It was an instant reaction to the suggestion. Danny was almost surprised at how upset he sounded. Starscream, listen. We will be crushed otherwise. I can get us out of here, but you need to trust me. Starscream groaned in pain as the rubble fell around them. This will sound strange, Danny continued, but I can phase through matter. I can get us out of here, but I need to make you intangible too. I have to be as close to your body as possible. I need to get you out of here, or you are going to die. Another piece of rock fell, and Starscream hunched lower towards Danny. Can you open your subspace? Starscream, please. Danny pressed both of his palms against Starscream's chest plate above him. Try. Starscream seemed to pause, as if to ask more questions or try and figure out where Danny got his delusions from, maybe even tell the human that he was crazy, but he stopped himself. Starscream then made a sound of pain as he tried to open his chest plates. But parts of but part of him were too crushed and dented, and it made a failing grinding sound before sliding back closed. Then he knew he could just crawl through Starscream's chestplate, but he really didn't want to freak the mech out or violate him. "Try again, you got this." Starscream tried again, and it opened most of the way before stalling, with just enough room for Danny to slip through. Perfect! Danny put both his hands through the gap and started to pull his body inside, facing his legs through the rock that was trapping it on his way. He double-tapped the metal around him to signal that he was safe inside, and Starscream closed his chestplate. "Now what?" the con around him groaned. "Hang on, Screamer. This will feel a little tingly." Danny could hear his voice echo in the frame around him. Danny placed his hands against the opposite sides of Starscream's frame that he could reach and channeled his intangibility through Starscream's frame, focusing on making sure to get every bolt, wire, and missile that was part of him. Focusing on parts of an enemy he didn't understand was a lot harder, but he needed to get the Seeker out of here in one piece, down to the last thruster. "How are we feeling out there?" Danny asked, a strain in his voice. Starscream's vocalizer started with just static before it reset with a pop. "How? Doesn't matter. This is hard. Get out of here," he groaned, in concentration. He had no idea what Starscream looked like right now, but he felt as he moved and started standing, frame phasing through the rubble. Then he stopped. "Fast! Faster the better, Screamer. Use those heels and go." "I don't know which way," his voice echoed around Danny. "Are we facing up?" "Yes." Danny narrowed his eyes. "You're light as a feather right now. Use your thrusters and stay upright." Then he heard some movement around him, and suddenly they were going up, and faster and faster they went, until suddenly he could see daylight through the seams of Starscream's frame. "Are we out?" the con gasped. "Yes." Suddenly Danny dropped the intangibility, and he felt Starscream collapse to the ground. They were likely on top of the mountain now. Danny banged his head backwards against Starscream's frame with a resounding thud. "Great way to spend 5 hours, am I right?" "That was 2.5 Earth hours," Starscream groaned. Danny laughed. "Really? It felt longer." Starscream didn't respond. "Starscream?" Danny knocked on the metal chest plate ahead of him. Nothing in return. "Starscream!" He knocked harder. "Hey!" "Be quiet, human. I'm in recharge," he grumbled back, still sounding pained. Danny rolled over. "I'm still inside you, you know." Starscream made a failed attempt to open up his chest plate again, and it cramped back shut, before even a silver of light made it in. Then he was about to speak up with something else when he heard the sound of jets overhead. He strained his ears to hear as they got closer and closer. Then suddenly they hit the ground around them with a resounding thud. They were surrounded by about 4 of them, by the sound of it. "Commander Starscream, we are responding to your distress call," a monotone voice called out. "You are rapidly losing Energon," another very similar voice added. Scarscream groaned. "Obviously, you dolts. Get me out of here." His voice box wavering. Then he heard another voice chime in, requesting ground bridge to our location. And then Starscream's frame started moving. "Guess he's in this for the long haul." Knockout stood over his commanding officer on his operating table, staring at the bizarre sight in front of him. Starscream, why do you have a human in your subspace?